Why You Must Listen. Alex stood before the mirror, a silent observer of his own reflection. He understood English news, movies, and conversations with ease. Yet, when it came to speaking, a frustrating wall appeared. His mind was a vast library of vocabulary and grammar, perfectly catalogued and understood. But the words, so clear in his head, simply refused to form coherent sentences on his tongue, leaving him feeling trapped and unable to express himself truly. This persistent inability gnawed at him daily, a constant reminder of a skill half possessed. He'd tried countless methods, diligently studying textbooks and memorizing lists. Still, the fluency he craved remained elusive, a distant dream. Each attempt to articulate a complex thought felt like a monumental struggle, leaving him exhausted and even more disheartened than before. The silence became his unintended default response. He often thought, "I understand English but I can't speak well." This lament was a heavy burden, hindering social interactions and professional growth. He longed to engage in spontaneous discussions, to share his ideas without the crippling fear of mispronunciation or grammatical errors. The gap between his comprehension and his articulation felt like an unbridgeable chasm, deepening his sense of isolation and inadequacy. There were moments, dark whispers in his mind, suggesting he should abandon the pursuit entirely. "Why you should not learn English," his inner critic murmured, "if it only brings frustration?" This wasn't about the language itself, but the rigid, fear-driven methods that stifled his natural desire to communicate. He questioned if his approach was fundamentally flawed, making the journey feel like an endless uphill battle. He considered quitting, convinced he wasn't cut out for it, that some inherent flaw prevented him. The sheer weight of self-doubt pressed down on him. Yet, a tiny spark of hope flickered within, a persistent longing to connect, to share his thoughts and feelings with the wider world. He knew deep down that giving up wasn't truly an option, despite the immense challenges. Then, one quiet evening, while listening to an old podcast, a simple phrase resonated deeply: "Why you must listen." It wasn't about active studying, but passive, immersive listening. This wasn't a new concept, yet its emphasis struck him differently. It was about absorbing the rhythm, the intonation, the natural flow of conversations, without the pressure of immediate response or performance. He realized he had been listening with an agenda, trying to analyze grammar or memorize phrases. The podcast host spoke about simply letting the sounds wash over you, like music. Listen and practice became his new mantra, but the listening part came first, without judgment. He started seeing listening as a fundamental, foundational pillar, not just a casual pastime, but a deliberate act. Alex began listening everywhere: podcasts during commutes, English news while cooking, audiobooks before sleep. He wasn't actively translating, just letting the language flow. This passive immersion started to reshape his brain's understanding of natural speech. He discovered nuances he'd never noticed before: the subtle emphasis, the way native speakers connected words seamlessly, creating a natural melody. The sheer volume of input began to create a subconscious map of English sounds and patterns. He wasn't just hearing words, he was hearing how they fit together, how emotions were conveyed through tone. This deep listening was different from his previous analytical approach. It felt less like studying and more like absorbing, like a sponge soaking up water, effortless and profound. Gradually, his internal ear sharpened. He started noticing his own thoughts forming in English more naturally, without conscious effort. It was a subtle shift, like a silent language awakening within him. This realization brought a new sense of hope, a tangible sign that his brain was indeed capable of internalizing the language beyond mere comprehension, preparing it for speech. But what about words? Remembering them felt like a never-ending uphill battle. He'd tried flashcards, lists, apps, all with limited success. He needed a fresh approach to how to remember words more effectively. Rote memorization felt sterile. Words learned in isolation quickly evaporated from his memory, like water through a sieve, leaving him frustrated and constantly repeating efforts. The podcast offered another clue: connect words to emotions, stories, or vivid images. Instead of happy, he imagined a specific joyful memory, linking the word to a personal experience. This made the vocabulary stick. How to remember words transformed from a tedious chore into a creative, almost playful exercise, engaging more parts of his brain in the learning process, making it enjoyable. He started keeping a small notebook, not for definitions, but for sentences where new words appeared naturally. He'd write a tiny story, a short dialogue, or even a silly joke incorporating the word. This contextual learning made the words come alive, giving them personality and purpose, anchoring them firmly in his memory through meaningful connections. It was a revelation. He also focused on word families and common collocations, realizing that words rarely stood alone. Learning make a decision instead of just decision made phrases feel more natural. This systematic approach helped him build a more robust, interconnected vocabulary network, making recall much faster and more intuitive, reducing the mental effort required during conversation attempts significantly. The visual aspect helped immensely. When learning Serene, he pictured a calm lake at sunrise. This multi-sensory approach created stronger memory pathways. It was no longer just a word, it was an experience, a feeling, a picture. This method, linking concepts and senses, profoundly changed how to remember words for him, making the process almost effortless and enjoyable. Now, the biggest hurdle: how to take first step for talking. His mouth felt glued shut, his tongue heavy with apprehension. He knew he needed to transition from internal fluency to external expression, but the fear of making mistakes paralyzed him. It felt like standing on the edge of a high diving board, knowing he had to jump but unable to initiate the plunge. The podcast suggested starting incredibly small. Not a grand speech, but a simple greeting. Hi, hello, good morning. He began by saying these words to himself in the mirror, acknowledging his own presence, building comfort with the sound of his own voice in English. This solitary practice reduced the pressure significantly, allowing him to focus purely on articulation. His first external step involved his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who always sat on her porch. He decided to just say good morning and nothing more. He practiced it repeatedly in his mind. The day he finally uttered those two words, a nervous tremor in his voice, felt like an Olympic victory. Mrs. Gable smiled warmly in return. It was a monumental achievement. That tiny success was a crack in his wall of fear. It showed him that the world wouldn't end, that people were generally kind. How to take first step for talking wasn't about eloquence, it was about initiating, about breaking the silence. He started with more neighbors, then shopkeepers, always simple greetings, building confidence one tiny interaction at a time. He learned that the first step didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be taken. Each brief exchange, no matter how simple, chipped away at his anxiety. The momentum built, slowly at first, but steadily. He felt a newfound freedom in these small verbal acts, realizing that even minimal communication was a powerful bridge, connecting him to others. Next, how to talk with anyone. This seemed daunting, a huge leap from simple greetings. He still feared awkward pauses, running out of things to say. He needed strategies for sustained conversation, for truly connecting beyond mere pleasantries. He knew understanding was one thing, but maintaining a flowing dialogue was an entirely different challenge, a true test of his growing confidence. He researched tips for conversation starters, focusing on open-ended questions. Instead of "Did you have a good day?" he tried "What was the most interesting part of your day?" This invited more than a yes/no answer, prompting the other person to share more. He realized how to talk with anyone was less about his perfect English and more about genuine curiosity. He also practiced active listening during conversations, not just waiting for his turn to speak. He'd paraphrase what the other person said, showing he understood, and ask follow-up questions. This created a natural back and forth, taking the pressure off him to constantly generate new topics, making the conversation feel collaborative and less like a performance. He learned to embrace silence, too. Not every pause was awkward, sometimes it allowed thoughts to form. He stopped rushing to fill every gap, allowing for a more natural rhythm. This relaxed approach made how to talk with anyone feel less like a performance and more like a genuine exchange, reducing his internal stress levels considerably during interactions. He started small, with people he felt comfortable with, a friendly barista, a fellow dog walker, a classmate. He chose low-stakes environments where mistakes were forgivable. This gradual expansion of his comfort zone was key to building the confidence needed to eventually talk with anyone without crippling anxiety, making each small step feel empowering and achievable. Then came the challenge of how to talk in English fluently, not just grammatically correct. He still often translated in his head, slowing him down. The goal was to think in English, to allow words to flow without that mental detour through his native tongue. This internal translation was a major barrier to natural, spontaneous conversation flow. He started practicing self-talk in English. Describing his actions aloud as he cooked, narrating his thoughts during a walk, even dreaming in English when possible. This constant internal monologue, even if imperfect, helped rewire his brain to process thoughts directly in the language, bypassing the translation step that had previously hindered his fluency. He also focused on intonation and rhythm. He mimicked phrases from movies and podcasts, not just the words but the musicality of them. This helped his speech sound more natural, less robotic. How to talk in English wasn't just about syntax, it was about the melody of the language, which conveyed much more than just the literal meaning of words. Crucially, he learned to forgive himself for mistakes. A wrong tense, a misplaced article, these weren't failures, but learning opportunities. He stopped striving for perfection and instead focused on conveying his message effectively. How to talk in English became less about flawless grammar and more about clear communication, reducing performance anxiety significantly. He understood that fluency wasn't about speaking fast, but about speaking smoothly, with minimal hesitation. He prioritized clarity over speed, allowing himself time to form thoughts. This deliberate practice of how to talk in English without constant self-correction allowed him to relax, making his speech more fluid and natural over time, improving steadily. English talking practice became a daily ritual. He found online language exchange partners. These conversations were invaluable, providing a safe space to experiment and make mistakes without judgment. The variety of accents and speaking styles also prepared him for real-world interactions, broadening his auditory comprehension and speaking adaptability. He joined an informal English conversation group at a local community center. The weekly meetings were intimidating at first, but the supportive environment encouraged participation. He found that sharing personal stories, even simple ones, helped him connect more deeply with the language and with the other learners, making the practice feel authentic and engaging. He also used a voice recorder to listen to himself. This was uncomfortable initially, but it highlighted areas for improvement: pronunciation, sentence structure, common filler words. English talking practice wasn't just about speaking, it was about critically evaluating his own output to refine his delivery and pinpoint specific areas that required more attention and effort. He committed to speaking English every day, even if just for 5 minutes. This consistent, low-pressure exposure built muscle memory in his mouth and brain. The more he spoke, the more natural it felt, the less hesitant he became. English talking practice became an integral part of his routine, as essential as brushing his teeth, cementing his progress daily. He even started narrating his day in English while alone, describing objects, actions, and thoughts. This constant self-engagement kept the language active in his mind. This English talking practice helped bridge the gap between understanding and speaking, making the language an organic extension of his thought process, constantly reinforcing his abilities and confidence. The cyclical nature of listen and practice truly revolutionized his learning. He listened to native speakers, absorbing their patterns, then immediately tried to mimic and use those patterns in his own speaking. This active imitation accelerated his progress dramatically, creating a powerful feedback loop that constantly refined his linguistic intuition and expressive capabilities. He noticed that the more he listened actively, the more material he had for his practice sessions. And the more he practiced, the more attuned his ears became to subtle nuances in spoken English. Listen and practice wasn't two separate activities, they were two sides of the same coin, feeding into each other, creating a synergistic learning experience that felt holistic and incredibly effective. When he encountered new vocabulary during listening, he made a conscious effort to immediately try using it in his next conversation or self-talk session. This immediate application solidified the words in his active vocabulary. Listen and practice meant closing the gap between recognition and production, transforming passive knowledge into usable linguistic tools. He sought out diverse listening materials, documentaries, stand-up comedy, interviews. This exposed him to different accents, registers, and conversational styles. Then, in his practice, he'd try to adapt his own speech to these varied contexts, making his English talking practice more versatile and preparing him for a wider range of real-life interactions. The concept of listen and practice truly became his guiding principle. It wasn't about achieving perfection, but about continuous improvement. Each listening session provided new insights, each speaking attempt offered valuable feedback. This iterative process was the engine of his progress, consistently propelling him forward on his journey to fluency and confidence. One afternoon, Alex found himself at a bustling international conference. A visiting delegate from Australia seemed lost, looking for a specific breakout session. Without hesitation, Alex approached him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice clear and confident, a stark contrast to his past struggles. It was the first time he truly felt his voice was his own. The delegate, relieved, explained his predicament. Alex not only gave clear directions but also engaged him in a brief, natural conversation about the conference topics. He wasn't thinking about grammar or vocabulary, the words simply flowed, a spontaneous exchange of ideas. This felt exhilarating, a true manifestation of his long, arduous journey. He found himself asking follow-up questions, genuinely interested in the delegate's perspective. He smiled, made eye contact, and his body language conveyed openness. This wasn't just how to talk in English, it was how to talk with anyone, truly connecting, transcending language barriers through authentic human interaction, making the experience deeply rewarding. Later that day, he even joined a small group discussing a complex topic. He contributed his thoughts clearly, confidently, and surprisingly fluently. The fear, the self-consciousness, the inner critic, all had faded into the background. He was simply Alex, engaging in a meaningful dialogue, fully present and articulate, a transformation he once deemed impossible. His journey, from understanding English perfectly but struggling to speak, to confidently conversing with anyone, was indeed a very interesting story. It wasn't about innate talent, but about persistence, strategy, and overcoming deeply ingrained fears. It was a testament to the power of small steps and consistent effort, leading to profound personal growth and achievement. He had stopped trying to learn English in the traditional, rigid sense. Instead, he had immersed himself, listened deeply, embraced mistakes, and found his own voice through consistent English talking practice. He realized that the greatest barrier had never been the language itself, but his own self-imposed limitations and the fear of imperfection. His story became an inspiration to others who shared his initial struggle. He often advised, why you must listen intensely, how to remember words through context, how to take first step for talking no matter how small, and consistently listen and practice without judgment. These were the true secrets to unlocking the power of speech, not just for English. He now understood that effective communication transcended perfect grammar. It was about connection, about sharing, about being understood. His journey from silent understanding to confident articulation was a personal triumph, opening up a world of possibilities and relationships he previously thought were out of his reach and forever unattainable. Every conversation, every new interaction, reinforced his belief in his own capability. The language, once a source of anxiety, had become a tool for empowerment, a bridge to new cultures and ideas. He truly embodied the phrase, "how to talk with anyone," now armed with the confidence to navigate any linguistic landscape, forging new bonds effortlessly. His transformed experience highlighted a crucial point: learning a language isn't just about vocabulary lists or grammar rules. It's about building courage, embracing discomfort, and finding joy in the process of self-expression. It's about the human desire to connect, which ultimately fuels the entire journey, making every step worthwhile and meaningful. Alex's story is a compelling reminder that the path to fluency is not a straight line, but a winding road filled with small victories and persistent effort. It's a journey of self-discovery, where overcoming linguistic barriers often means overcoming personal fears, leading to a richer, more connected life, brimming with new opportunities and deeper relationships. He learned that the "why you should not learn English" thought was a lie born of fear. The truth was, you should learn it, but with joy, curiosity, and courage. His voice, once trapped, was now free, resonating with confidence and clarity. He had not just learned a language, he had unleashed his own potential, his very interesting story resonating with all. His transformation was remarkable, a testament to the power of consistent English talking practice and the integration of listen and practice into every facet of his daily life. From a quiet observer, he became an active participant, a true testament to personal growth and determination in the face of daunting challenges, proving anything is possible. His advice was simple yet profound: immerse yourself, be patient with yourself, and never stop trying. The key to unlocking your English voice lies within your willingness to speak, despite imperfections. Embrace the journey, and the words will surely follow, creating a beautiful symphony of connection and understanding, forging pathways to new friendships. And that, he believed, was the most very interesting story of all, not just mastering a language, but discovering the power of one's own voice, finally capable of reaching out and truly connecting with anyone, anywhere. His journey continues, a testament to the endless possibilities that unfold when you dare to speak.